Hello, Saginaw. Welcome to another episode of Saginaw Spotlight, where we shine a light on the incredible people and businesses that make our city shine. I'm your host, Alex, and today we are sitting down with Dr. Ali Greco, a licensed psychologist and founder of Parathera, an online emotional support service that helps people manage stress and anxiety in everyday life. Whether you're overwhelmed, stuck, or just need someone to talk to, today's episode is for you. Dr. Greco, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much. As a hypnotherapist myself, I work with a lot of clients dealing with anxiety, and I know you do too. Let's start at the beginning. What is anxiety and what are the main causes?
Oh boy, those are some big questions. So I think what most people think of when they think of anxiety is the physical symptoms that go along with the emotions. So I think what most people are thinking of would be that they are feeling scared, and then their body reacts to that in lots of ways. So your heart rate speeds up, you might have shortness of breath. You might be feeling that it's difficult to come down from that, right? And that's often because the cortisol has just bloomed in your body. And so the fight or flight kind of triggers that we get in order to keep us safe, especially from physical threats, often come to the fore when we have emotional threats as well. So the causes of anxiety are often rooted in how we respond to the world around us, the thoughts that we're having, and then our body's reaction to those thoughts. And then often past experiences get triggered by current experiences. And so it may not be that the thing that is in front of you right now is actually all that threatening, but it can remind you of a time, especially kind of in your subconscious, of a time when something was threatening and your body's like, I got to keep you safe. And it will
Yeah.
do, what is necessary to do that. And so that is, I think, what most people think of when they think of anxiety, is the physical experience of what's occurring around whatever situation has brought on those thoughts and those feelings.
Yes, that's a good explanation. And what are the main causes in today's society? I know one is overcrowding. I think there's too many people. We all get a little nervous when there's too many people, right?
I think that's probably true, especially if you are someone who feels the need to protect your space. And, if you've got a pocket of safety and that is somewhat culturally bound, there, in cultures that are more city oriented or are more collective in nature, their protective boundary of safety is shorter. But once that's encroached upon, all of their signals kind of go up, and your body wants to protect you because you feel unsafe. And so you're looking around and you're kind of watching your back and feeling vulnerable. And when you feel vulnerable, your body is going to react to those feelings and try to figure out how to keep you safe.
Yes, yes, that's a great explanation. Yes.
There are
Um,
lots of threats. We read about things, right? You scroll or you doom scroll and you read about things that are happening, even if they're not happening in your town or in your house, you're able to envision what someone else is experiencing or what it would be like for you if you were in that circumstance. And just by having imagination, we can put ourselves in situations that make our bodies feel vulnerable. So even in that process of sort of empathizing with someone else's pain can put us into a state of heightened, um, if not anxiety, sort of the ability to be more, I'm going to use the word aroused, but I don't mean that in the sexual way. I mean that in the clinical way, just getting your body sort
yeah,
of amped up.
triggered. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
triggered is probably the right term. Yes, exactly.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really does. Um, what are some examples of when everyday stress gets too much and becomes chronic anxiety?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of us have to work in situations or be in family situations that we are not able to immediately leave, right? So when you're in a work situation that is either kind of toxic because the people around you are, getting their needs met by being difficult or angry, or you're having to deal with the public and you have to problem solve for other people and meet their needs, and it's not really something where you're in a position to be able to put things on hold and go get your needs met. So everyday situations where you're probably giving more than you're receiving. If you're in a family situation where that also you're giving more than you're receiving, or you're just not able to get enough of the support you need, either at work because, a lot of us are working lean these days. There's not enough other people to do the work, and the work just keeps piling up. That kind of stress can be really chronic. Um, and so I think a lot of it is that if you aren't able to escape a circumstance that is causing you stress and anxiety, that becomes something that over time builds up. And that's where the chronic stress comes in, that chronic anxiety, where you are just trying to cope as best you can, but you're in a situation that makes it difficult for you to extract yourself.
Right. Some people can't extract themselves. They have a good job, but an angry boss, or they're trapped in a marriage where there's some friction between the partners, but they can't, it's not something they can leave easily.
Right.
But it's like, I think we were designed to run away from danger, but sometimes our modern life, we're right close to what feels like an unsafe situation, but we have to stay there. So that's where the anxiety becomes, we have to have a good way to manage it, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right that, in evolution, we were intended, I think, to be dealing with external physical stressors that we would spike our cortisol, and then we would get out of that situation, and then we would have some downtime. And then that would, happen again. In our modern life, it's very difficult to get away from any of the stressors. They tend to be kind of everywhere, all around us. And it's not a practical advice to say sort of drop out of your life. There are obviously times when you have to make big changes. Not going to say that there aren't times that you have to change jobs or leave the relationship. Those absolutely are sometimes the only thing that you can do to protect your physical or mental health. But when those things aren't either at that level or just are not tenable, then there are things you have to do to sort of work on bringing that cortisol down in whatever downtime you have. And so that's why people recommend a lot of physical responses to anxiety. There are certainly mental, changing your thoughts and how you process the world around you, super important. But when you want to change the impact of anxiety on the body, that's when you have to communicate with the body. And in my training, we were taught that when anxiety shows up in your, parasympathetic system, so the system that isn't ruled by your frontal lobe, all of the things that happen without you, so your breathing and the release of the cortisol and those things that happen to keep you going, that you don't have any formal, you can't talk to it, right? It doesn't listen to words.
Right.
That's when you have to rely on your breathing. The way that we communicate with our parasympathetic nervous system is through our breath. So when you are stressed, you breathe shallowly and you take small breaths. And that's what happens. You don't get the oxygen because you're ready to run. And it's one of the ways then that you signal to your body that you're actually safe is that you change your
Yeah.
breathing. And that's when the body goes, oh, well, if I'm able to take deep breaths and they're slower, then I must be fine.
Yeah.
And then it behaves as though it's fine. And so it reduces the cortisol that it's pumping into your system. And it tends to then reduce all of the other things, your heart rate, and the things that we associate with that kind of stress. So I like to think about how you're communicating to your body that you're actually safe. Because really we kind of villainize anxiety as this thing we don't want. Um, but one of the things that I try to help my clients understand is that anxiety is a symptom of your body trying to keep you safe. It's getting signals that you don't feel safe, and its whole job is to keep you alive.
Yeah.
And so it
Yes.
wants to keep you safe. And so if you can help it understand that I am angry and I'm sad and this hurts, but I'm not actually unsafe, you can
Right.
then have these feelings without your body having to overreact to them.
I like that explanation a lot. I feel like anxiety and then also aggression is terribly frowned on in society because it doesn't work in but it was a tool given by evolution to keep us safe. Here comes a predator, rah, we're going to ch fight him and chase him away. That saved our lives. But now in modern society, it's a bad aggression, always down, down, push it down. But it had its value, and if it was totally useless now, it wouldn't be coming up still. There's
Right.
still going to be times when bullies approach you in the workplace or at school, and you might need to, hey, push back a little. So these are tools, but there's a balance, right? You have to know when to use them correctly.
Yeah. And I think by being able to see them as tools, you really change the sort of victim feeling of being I'm at the mercy of my own body or my own feelings, and I don't have control over this, and I'm just in the storm. And I think that's often where people come and seek support and help is when they feel like they don't know how to get out of that storm. And that's often that first place of let's teach you how to downregulate. Let's get there. And then we can
Yes.
figure out how to look at sort of what triggers these feelings. How do we keep them from, escalating? And I think that's often where the work happens not so much in changing how your body's reacting to the situation, so much as changing how you are thinking about the signals your body is giving you when you're entering these situations.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. And I love your point that in our modern society, it's unrealistic to remove all stress from your life. It's not going to happen. What you have to do is manage the stress as best you can. So
Yeah.
I love that viewpoint. Um, what are some, well, uh, I wanted to not first skip a question. I went to your website and I learned about paratherapists. And could you explain what that means?
Yes.
Because that's a new term for me too. Um, please explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Parathera really is focused on emotional support. So while I am a psychologist and am trained in therapy, I really feel like there is a sort of hole in our ability to help connect people to other humans and support them through challenges in their life. And you don't necessarily need therapy in order to help people move through those challenges. Often, emotional support is really what people need. Often, it can be in addition to therapy. I really love the idea that somebody is figuring out their patterns and working on deeper work with their therapist, but they had a bad day at work and things are really stressful and they want to talk about it. They want to be able to vent. They want to be able to kind of process those emotions. You don't necessarily need a therapist for that. So paratherapists, para in this case, if you think about paramedic or paralegal or a paraprofessional, the idea behind that is just that it's someone who helps in the profession of. So in this case, these are people who are trained by psychologists, but they are in the service of helping in mental health, but they themselves aren't at that certified um, licensed level because they don't necessarily need to be. So peer support is a way of helping bring stability. And so we train the paratherapists. Often it's sort of someone who has studied psychology or they've got a lot of experience in customer service and they have a lot of empathy and they really want to help other people. And so this is a way of sort of helping to train them to be able to work with people to keep them stable. So you'll see this model a lot in substance abuse, where you'll have peer support to help people work their program. This idea coming in and helping sort of mainstream people get through their life challenges. So this is you had a fight with your boyfriend or you've really struggling at work and you don't have anybody there you want to talk to about it because it's not a safe environment to talk at work about work. And maybe your family does not understand. Or you come from a family that isn't very supportive. For one, come from a family that is all about solving problems, and they will not let you sit with your emotions. They will not let you vent unless they are allowed to help you solve the problem. And if I just want to get the feeling out, they are not people I will turn
Right.
to.
Hey, I'm guilty of that. I want to solve the problem. I don't want to, I'm guilty of that. But at the same time, I've seen many clients come to me and they just start talking and they don't we run out of time to do any hypnosis. And my feeling is, well, that they needed to say what they needed to say. And I just listen with an open mind and an open heart. And it seems that they needed someone to vent to and to just release what they were holding.
Yes, exactly. And that's really the space to be able to do that. And sometimes you want to do that once, and sometimes you need to do that kind of regularly. And so what I find is that clients will come and do a vent session to sort of like get it out of their head. And then maybe they'll pick up a problem solving session later where they're like, oh, okay, now that you and I have already know the story. Let's figure out what I could do differently, or if there is anything that I could do differently. And so we kind of pick up that idea of sort of next right step. That's a kind of Jungian process of just sort of recognizing that I don't have to solve the whole problem. I only have to solve the next right step. And so that's where these very short sessions, our sessions are only about a half hour. And the reason is that I want people to be able to feel like they can get help in these small chunks without it feeling like it's once a week and it has to be 50 minutes and you have to have an ongoing relationship. Like the idea being that if you need it, it's available, it's affordable, and you can fit it into your schedule. And so that's where these sort of short sessions with someone that you can trust, but who you can actually afford to see is helping to
Yes.
be able to help people move through whatever those experiences are. If, they aren't necessarily at a clinical level, breaking up with your boyfriend, you can go to a therapist for it for sure, but you're not going to get a
Right.
diagnosis.
Hey,
And you probably
sometimes
don't need one. You're just dealing with a life stressor.
hey, sometimes a person often they don't have anyone giving them good advice in their circle. So their partner or co-workers or family, they may give terrible advice or no advice at all. And so we serve a big service there just by giving healthy, um, helpful advices that have worked for others. That's a big step.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We focus on sort of strength-based problem solving, so that next right step is often based on what has already worked for you. What are you already good at? Like I am not going to try to teach you something completely separate from what you already know because everybody's doing something that's working. Even if they're feeling overwhelmed, they're still living their life, they're still moving forward. And so figuring out what it is that we can do more of, and then maybe there's something that I can add that we can augment. Learning, box breathing, for instance, is a very basic talent, but it could be something where they're already able to sit and take deep breaths, and then we just give them a little
Yeah.
more structure on how to do that effectively. But if they're already focusing on their breath, that's a strength and I can build on it. If they
Mhm.
aren't, then what else are they doing? And is that a direction that I should go? So it's not like you have to come in and like follow my program. I'm definitely more of the mind that what works is to do more of what has been helpful already for the individual.
Yes, yes. Hey, I love that you mentioned breathing. It is so important to uh, stop the escalating anxiety. So I'm a big fan of the Wim Hof method of breathing, but for my clients, it's a bit intense. I dumbed it, I trimmed it to a smaller, approachable. It's not going to make them, oh my goodness, right? But box breathing is very popular with my clients for relieving anxiety. So yeah, there's a whole world in breathing. I think that getting oxygen up into your brain is a should be everyone's big goal because it does help manage crazy emotions that may overwhelm us. The oxygen seem to clear the mind in a unique way. So,
Yeah, I think it's that kind of cascade effect, right? You're increasing the oxygen, which then signals to the parasympathetic system that it can stop its rev, and then that reduces the cortisol, which then enables everything else to calm down. And so I can definitely see that you get a clearer brain, partially because you don't have the other sort of hormones that are trying to drive you into action and not thought. And so I think you can't think your way out of anxiety. It just doesn't, it's not an executive function problem.
right,
And so
right.
that I think that's part of where people can get stuck is that they
Yeah,
are like trying to use that executive function tool and they lose. And so
yeah,
going back to the body, I think is really important. So breathing. And the other thing that we'll teach is just to use your senses to sort of ground you. Because often when you are having all this internal weather and the storm is inside, you lose track of the rest of where you are. And so what can I see? What can I smell? What can I touch? And sometimes people add numbers to that because they want to sort
yeah,
of slow it down and kind of regulate. So I
yeah,
can see three things and then you have to name them. And I can smell
yes,
two things and you have to name them. In an effort to get people to refocus on the here and now and kind of calm their system through their senses. And I have found that to be pretty effective as well. I
yeah,
think just reconnecting with, no, I'm actually fine. Like physically,
yeah,
I'm okay. And then that can keep it from escalating because there is a point once you hit panic attack, that is difficult to come back from. Then you got to kind of ride that sucker out, and it's awful. And I really feel
yeah,
for people when they get into that state.
yeah.
And so my goal is to usually try to catch it earlier because it's
Early, yeah,
easier when it's smaller.
yeah. When it's smaller, um, it it takes a whole lot. Once it triggers an emotion, oh man, now you got to write it out, and it may take a while. But I love how you mentioned the counting because it's a simple tool we can all reach for, and it really does work. And what we're doing is putting the mind on a task other than overthinking. You keep overthinking about the same trigger. Now you're making more adrenaline. And that's why, oh man, it seems chronic. But what you just start counting your breaths, breathe like like you, if your hormone was trying to get you to run from a risk, a danger, well, you're breathing, go into that like you're running, and now oh, it's time to rest. Now, oh, the running's over, time to relax. And so it
Exactly.
really does work, huh?
It really does work. I don't know if you read this, there was this study done a long time ago, and it was basically that if you smile, even if you're not feeling happy, but the physical act of smiling can change how you feel. And your
Yes,
body responds to the fact that you're actually smiling with an increase in, in mood elevating feelings. And so while you might not actually be happy, there is this sense that when we change how we stand, when we change how we hold ourselves, our body and our emotions respond to that. And so it's not to say that we have ultimate control because we are so reacting to the world around us, but we probably have more control than we generally think we do, and more
yes,
tools.
yes, yes. Totally agree. Um, I feel like exercise plays a big role in reducing anxiety. But it's very hard to get a client who doesn't exercise so what do you have any tricks to help how do you do
Yeah,
that?
we do. I mean, often, right, you have to connect it to the value that they hold. So the exercise itself can be rewarding, but it can also be punishing. And so you have to, I think, figure out what it is about exercise that feels punishing for people. And so sometimes it's their definition of exercise. I have to go a half hour and it has to be at the gym, and they have like really specific rules around what exercise means. It doesn't count. It's my favorite phrase when someone says, well, it didn't count that I did that 10 minutes of what of walking. That's not exercise. And so some of it is sort of reframing that because you're like, no, girl, 10 minutes of walking, it's exactly what I'm talking about. Um, and so I often look for that of what, are there mental barriers before I get to the physical barriers? Because I mean, I got to start where you are, and I don't want to
Yeah,
like prescribe something. Again, it's not my program. It's what you need, and moving
yeah,
the body is another way of communicating with that parasympathetic nervous system. And it also
everything's
does
okay.
burn off the cortisol. Like that's the
Yes,
thing that I try to explain to people is that it's built up in your system and it's got to go somewhere, and it eventually will
yeah,
come and get filtered out. But if you want it done faster, uh, exercise will burn off all of that cortisol. So like
yes,
terrible meeting with your boss,
yeah,
you're up here, you're vibrating up
yeah,
here.
yes,
And there's only so many ways we can soothe ourselves after the event. And exercise is one of the most beneficial ways to like just burn off that cortisol. And then we can do some of the other self-soothing stuff that feels better. Um, but you have to get that stuff out.
yes, yes. When I'm in a highly anxious state, my energy levels is very high. Now, if I go work out, I'm bringing it down. I'm tired after the workout, so I'm less likely to overthink because I gave it to the gym,
Okay,
and
I
I
like that a lot. Yeah, that's it exactly. I'm the same way. I also personally really like to listen to audiobooks while I'm working out because that also gets me into somebody else's world, right? Like I have this opportunity to not ruminate because that's my particular. I will just like examine something from every possible angle. And that can be useful if there's genuinely something I can change or do something about it. But if it's just rehashing a thing that's occurred that I can't change, ruminating on it does nothing but keep me stuck. And so I really like to enter a story of someone else's life while I'm working out. And then I think it's kind of like going to a movie where I'm able to then come back into my life and be like, oh, right, that feels a little more distant because I spent some time away from it.
yes, yes, that's a great way to look at it. Yes. Before we continue, I'd like to thank our sponsor, B&H Renovations, right here in Saginaw. They specialize in repairing foundation issues and basement and crawl space waterproofing. I waterproofed my basement and I highly recommend it. I love the results. B&H Renovations has over 23 years of experience and they can give you a free quote over the phone. Mention this ad and get 10% off your foundation or waterproofing project. Just call B&H Renovations at 517-525-1584. And we are back with Dr. Ali Greco. Let's talk about when a person should get help. How can someone know if they need professional support and what kind of support is right for them?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think a couple of things there. It's easier to talk about the more severe. I think when symptoms of your experience. Let's take anxiety. It could be depression. It can be when those symptoms are interfering with your daily life. So once you're at a point where you're really struggling to keep your commitments, you're not sleeping well, you're feeling like you're stuck, or you're just unable to get the energy to get up and go to work. Once you've gotten to that level, you definitely need professional help. When it is interfering with your daily life, that is when someone who has, a license and a clinical degree is someone who's going to be able to keep things from getting any worse and make sure that you get actual, real treatment. Step down from that, and now you're in an area that I don't think people get a lot of formal help in. I think your work in hypnotherapy is a wonderful area where you are able to recognize that your coping skills and maybe your social network that gives you your support isn't enough. Things have gotten to a place where, and usually it's situational. What I find is that people live their lives and they learn how to cope, and then situations happen that stress that. I read a story in the New York Times during COVID that one of the challenges that people ran into during the COVID like lockdowns was that they just weren't able to access the normal ways that they would uh, deal with stress. So they couldn't go to the gym, they couldn't get together with their friends. Everything was sort of happening on Zoom. And what unlocked for me was that during those periods where you can't access your normal resources to move through stress is when you need more professional help. It's really as simple as that. So take having you have to move. Maybe that means that you have moved away from friends or family or the neighborhood that you used to hang out with your neighbors. Like those were people who were your social supports. There's going to be a period where you don't have access to that, and until you can rebuild it, that is when it is super useful to go and get professional support while you're moving through those transitions. One of the groups that I'm focused on right now are recent college graduates. Um, they are leaving the college system where they have their friends and their professors and the college counseling system, and they're moving out into the world. And they may be going, living back at home, which has its own sort of relationship dynamics now that you're an adult. Maybe you broke up with your partner because you aren't going to move, maybe they moved off to graduate school and you didn't like so much change in that period of life. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily clinical, but you've now lost access to the things that kind of kept you stable. And that's really where I see seeking out professional help, be it emotional support, hypnotherapy, massage, getting your uh, sort of professional supports in place while you then work to rebuild your informal supports, I think is exactly the time that you access those kinds of resources.
That's an excellent way to put it. Yes, I totally agree. Well, um, many people feel shame or fear when it comes to therapy. How do you help people break through those barriers?
I think really just that, it's interesting culturally when we ask for help, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. We are saying that there's something wrong and that we can't handle it. And in a culture like ours, where individual, ruggedness matters, that is a difficult thing to be able to say out loud. And so often what we try to do is reduce that barrier to entry, so that maybe it isn't that you're vulnerable. Maybe it's that you're in a terrible situation. Situation is the problem. You're not the problem. And so I want you to come in and talk about the situation. And that can lower the feeling of shame because it isn't really about you. It's about what's happening around you. And so that kind of reframe is something that we try to do to kind of make it less about your loss or something that means that you're at fault. So that's really what we try to bring down is that it's about you because it impacts you, but it doesn't mean that your fault.
I love this view, and it's healthier than what the psychiatrists who dispense the medications, they're viewed like this, like, let's say you had a death in the family, now you can't stop crying. Well, they'll say, you're clinically depressed. They put this label on you. Here's the drug we're going to treat you with. I think that's terrible because it's a situational, like you mentioned. The same with anxiety. You may find that this person has anxiety because they have a bully in their life. That's a situation. It's not that they are always worried. It's only they're worried when they have to meet the bully. So I think a majority of our um, behavior that we want to change is situational, that it's caused by something, and it's not a broken brain. It's something that's triggering this behavior.
Yeah, I was challenged in graduate school when I learned about kind of how we moved into the medicalization of mental illness. There definitely are times when it is a physical problem that needs to be remediated. There is no question in my mind that there is a class of folks for whom medication are very helpful, necessary. Um, but we have blended, I think, exactly in your illustration, the situational, um, overwhelmed coping mechanisms with it's a chronic problem where we're needing to medicalize that problem. And I think being a little bit more thoughtful and kind of stepping into and not starting at the medical side, stepping in and
Right.
starting at the sort of human side. What is your situation? How have you learned to cope? What kind of supports do you have? What can we do to sort of shore that up? And then let's see where you are. And if it is such that the depression can't be remediated because you don't have the internal ability to do what is necessary to make the change. So I definitely worked with a number of clients for whom the anxiety had gotten to a place where they just couldn't function. So even the idea that I would ask them to make changes in routine or learn how to change how they're breathing was more than they could manage. Like they had just been coping and losing effectiveness for so long that we did have to shore them up for a while we then sort of added in the scaffolding. So I've
Yeah.
learned over time that interviewing people, talking with them to figure out where they land on this sort of spectrum of ability is important when we're talking about whether or not somebody needs or what they need. They will tell you what they're experiencing, and then I think figuring out where in this line of sort of acuity and level of intervention they are
Yeah.
is really important. And I feel like most people are down here, but our medical system treats everybody kind of up here because that's how they get
Yeah.
paid. Not
Right.
that doctors get paid very much, but that's the only way they get paid is if you have insurance and you have a diagnosis. That's what the system is set up to do. So unless you're able to find someone who will see you and won't make it a medical issue, I think most people need more access, more resources, more support at the level that doesn't medicalize them.
Right. Right. And I don't know about um, how our ancestors dealt with trauma, but I think it was more talking about it, and there wasn't drugs yet. So there
Yeah, I
was
mean,
alcohol,
yeah,
but
exactly. I mean, I think we were no more effective in the recognition of somebody else's experience, but what we did have was um, stronger, smaller support networks. Um, and so you didn't move as much. You had multi-generational homes. We had smaller groups, which worked for most people. Now, that could mean that you could never escape your bullies. So I can't say that this is universal,
it's
but we
true.
certainly did have an opportunity to have less change than we have in our current modern world, where
Yeah.
you are responsible for managing so much oncoming change. And
Yeah.
we just didn't. We didn't have the technology changes, we didn't have the work changes, we didn't like just think about everything that we're having to try to take in and absorb and be effective and efficient with. Um, our brains were not set up for this
None
level
of it.
of input and
Yeah,
change.
right. It's way too much. It's an overload on every level. And it's
And we're
amazing that we are coping at all, but
honestly, and I think that's why trying to find ways to bring humans back together,
yeah,
in multitude of ways, and also get us to reconnect to, our bodies and recognize how our thoughts and our bodies are connected. Those
yes.
are all, I think, really important skills to help people manage the world that we're in, since, to your point, we can't change this.
And it's going to get faster.
I
my,
assume it's going to get faster. Is there like a tipping point at which we just are
yeah,
it's zooming by and we just are not engaging?
it's hard to say, but it looks like we're getting faster and faster. And um, I, It's it's going to be a wild ride. I don't see that anxiety is close to being solved. I think there's a big need for therapists more and more, and
Yeah.
for people to approach it with, hey, you know, if I'm struggling at work, I'm struggling at school, it's time to talk to someone about anxiety.
Yes,
So,
exactly. I don't think anxiety doesn't go away because anxiety is part of being human. Period. What we then learn is how to manage the symptoms of being vulnerable and feeling unsafe in this world. And what can we do to increase our sense of confidence, connectedness, surety in the world that we're living in? And while I think we can do that with informal channels, our current culture makes that more difficult. It's harder to make friends, it's harder to maintain friends. You're not in small social circles often, especially if you're leaving work every 2 years, or it just you're on shifts and you're not able to make friends. I think some of those places that we used to rely on for those informal networks are part of the reason that we have sort of the loneliness epidemic and some of the challenges in people feeling like they reach certain parts of their life and they're like, where are my friends? It is harder in this culture to manage that. And then as things are moving very fast, I think that's when we need to fill in the gap with trained therapists, with trained, paratherapists. And part of the reason that I've been thinking about the paratherapy world is that it scales. You can train a lot more people to help a lot more people.
yes,
One of the limiting factors of being a psychologist is one, the education and the money it takes to get that, and then two, the licensure process. It can take easily a decade for somebody to get fully trained.
I
Um,
believe it.
we don't have time.
Right, right. Exactly. I agree.
And so if we want to be helping as many people as possible, I think being able to have someone who has the training who then trains a bunch of people who can help more people that train the trainer kind of
Yeah,
model is really essentially what I'm trying to do with offering peer support so that people are able to get that first rung of help.
yes.
And then we can help decide with them if they need to go up the ladder and work with someone with more training and more clinical background.
I think your method is most valuable when the problems of the client is not solvable. And it's not often, but time to time, they're living and it's a problem that has to be managed. It can't be solved. Like maybe a physical disability or something that you can't it's not gonna, we're not gonna fix that, but we're gonna give you management tools to make the best out of a situation that can't be solved because that sympathetic ear and just that, hey, um, sometimes the problem can't be solved. That's sad, right?
It is. You make a really good point, and I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I think you're exactly right that very often while you look out for support is because you don't have an avenue for change, and you need to be able to stay stable and stay, you know, um, capable while you're living the life you're living. And I think a disability is a really good example. I was chatting with a woman who had hurt her back, and she was previously very active. Her social life was very much her gym. That's where she got a lot of her social supports. And then when she was not able to go to the gym to do what she would normally do, she felt really isolated. And it was luckily for her temporary, but she had a good 6 months of feeling just awful because she had, the physical illness and then she had the sort of cutoff from her friends and her supports. And it was that kind of, I can't change it. I've got to live through it. What am I going to do? I got to rebuild. And it was exactly then that coming in and being like, I want to talk. I want to feel like I can, I don't know, that I can connect in that way that she did when she had been at the gym. And I think being able to then reinforce what it takes to do that connection and maybe brainstorm other places that she could go to make friends even while her back was healing, that was also a way for her to feel like she wasn't as stuck. Because that circumstance meant that she had to pivot, but she had never had to pivot before. And so doing that on your own is really difficult.
Right. Yeah, knowing when to pivot and how to move your life to a better place, that does take someone with some has good advice based on previous success with other clients that you can't. It's hard to do that on your own. It can be done, but it's harder without someone to help you.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. I mean, what is it that it's hard to solve the problem with the same brain that created the problem? Like, you don't have enough input to be able to be creative. You need to get more information to be able to look at things differently or put together new options. You don't have enough clay. You can't make that sculpture because you don't have enough
Yeah.
clay.
Well, one big problem with anxiety is overthinking. So you're trying to solve your own problem. You're thinking, 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 thinking. And sometimes it just, I, I feel like an action plan is often healthier than, you know, because hey, have you ever had a client who knows so much about psychology and all the terms and everything? They t yeah, but they're still stuck. So okay, action plan. We got to gently push you towards taking an action, a physical action.
Yeah, I really think that's a good point that the ruminating, and this is connected to worrying, right? People like to believe that if I worry about it, I'm somehow keeping it from happening. And if I ruminate on it, then at some point the answer will come to me. And I think that that kind of repetitive motion, mental motion in and of itself has a slightly obsessive flavor that is a way of staying stuck. And so being able to kind of kick out of that, to your point, having a plan that is linear or separate from the worrying, I think is actually much more effective. But there's a little magical thinking that goes in with worrying that can
Yeah.
be quite alluring in the beginning.
Magical thinking is a
Yes,
term
are
we could
you?
talk about for a long time, huh?
Yeah.
There's good and
I
bad parts of magical thinking, right? Because you got the placebo effect, which is real.
Oh
So
yeah.
people believe I'm getting better. Well, you're going to show signs that you're getting better. But then the magical thinking of, um, okay, what's an example of unhealthy magical thinking?
Yeah. So We think a little bit about having more control over the future than we do, right? So one of the things you'll hear in CBT world is about fortune telling. So you say, I know what's going to happen next. So like I'm going to show up in this meeting and the guy who's mean to me is going to say X and Y and I'm going to feel terrible. And you're already in that meeting. You're already feeling the feelings of being in that meeting. And that meeting is like next week. And so we have this idea that by projecting out and seeing what the future is going to hold for us, that we are preparing ourselves for that inevitable future. That is a kind of magical thinking where we are believing that we can exert control over the future by imagining it now and trying to prepare emotionally. That's not the same thing as thinking about the meeting and having a plan when the guy shows up and is a jerk. Having a plan about how you're going to approach that situation, what you're going to say, how you're going to calm yourself, that kind of plan can be very effective. What is magical thinking about it is that I can somehow emotionally prepare myself, feel all those terrible feelings that I'm going to feel later, feel them now, and then they won't be as bad in the future. That kind of magical thinking isn't true. All it does is make you feel bad now and
Yeah,
later.
right. I
And you're not
totally agree.
actually prepared. You're just putting yourself through an emotional ringer um, under the guise of preparing. And so you have to learn the
Wow.
difference. What does
Yeah,
actual preparation look like? And what does rumination and fortune telling look like?
right, right. Excellent point. Um, can you share a success story of someone who overcame anxiety in a meaningful way?
So many. I have
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories, I did some of my training in the prison system, and I worked with a client who was about to be released. He had about 3 months left, and so he was trying to prepare for his life leaving the prison system, and was feeling really anxious about what life outside the prison was going to look like. And he had good reason, right? That's not He wasn't being anxious because that wasn't a realistic scenario where things could be difficult. Things were going to be difficult. But what he was struggling with was a lot of sort of, I can't handle whatever it is that comes, right? So we were working on kind of shoring up his ability to handle situations. And that would be him bringing up things that he was scared about, and then us sort of talking through what of the skills he already has would be effective in those situations. But even so, he was still having panic attacks. So he would do, to your point, he would think about a situation, he would ruminate on it, his body would react, and he would have a panic attack. And so we were trying to work on changing that pattern. And so he wanted to explore visualization. He wanted to work on how he could engage his mind in using visualization to kind of focus and then calm his body. And so he found a particular visualization that worked for him. He took a ball. He's the kind of person who can envision things very clearly. And so he could picture a ball in his mind. And so his job was to make the ball bigger, change the ball's color.
Oh,
And in doing that, it gave him something to just focus on. All of his senses, because the size, the color, all of that was being used, and it calmed his breathing. And so he found that the moment he would begin to picture something he felt he couldn't handle, he would start visualizing. Things would calm down, he would remember his skills, and he was able to then move through. So his main goal was to be able to go to a concert with his daughter when he got out. She had been wanting to go to this concert. It happened to coincide with his ability to go with her. He was scared to death. He hadn't done well in crowds. To your point, he felt really vulnerable. Having been in the prison system, you don't want to be around a lot of people. You are vulnerable. So he was really worried about the situation. So we worked on visualizing it, using his skills, using his visualization to calm his body. And he let me know when he got out that he had been able to successfully go to this concert with his daughter. Like
Mm,
it
great.
was nothing magical. It was he did the work because he was motivated, because he loved his daughter, because he wanted to be there for her. And so he used his skills to figure out how to be present for her in that moment. And oh, it makes me tear up every time.
That's awesome. That is a great story. I always find it fascinating when the prisoner, you live in a super hostile environment, and now you come out to normal everyday society, and that's scary. Come on, the prison's the one that's scary, not the regular society, right?
You know what's
But not
interesting?
having a job is scary, and violating parole is scary, and so there are real fears there.
Yeah, the prison becomes the pain you know. It's pretty regimented, and you're following a system. And so you don't have to make a lot of decisions. There's not a lot of, so there's actually danger there that you can put your attention to, you can focus on. There are strategies for avoiding that danger. And so you have fewer decisions that you have to make. And so often when you're out in our world, everything is now on your shoulders. How are you going to get fed? Where are you going to stay? How are you going to make money? And so those basic functions of life become very challenging because every decision is on you now. And that can be super overwhelming. Um, and so that's
Yeah.
part of why we were doing that sort of 6 month transition was that I was part of it. But of course, there was people helping them find jobs, people helping them deal with relationship stuff, like all of the stuff to try to help them prepare for you're going to have to make a decision from the moment you wake up and hopefully and every moment in between there's going to be decisions that you have to make and we are used to that. That's the pain that we're used to. But I find that that's also part of why people need emotional support is that sometimes being the person who has to make all the decisions can be absolutely exhausting. And so
Yes.
figuring out a way of off loading some of that onto people who can help um,
Yeah.
can be super important, or helping you find space to be able to breathe, to be able to make those decisions. Because man,
Yeah.
adulting is not easy.
None of this is easy, huh?
Yeah.
But it's easier with someone who can help you with good advice and an empathetic ear. So those are the main qualities of a good therapist, right? You have to have good advice and also a compassionate heart, right?
Yeah. It's funny, we were trained to not give advice in the traditional way. There's just a lot of educating. And we have a particular sort of set of training that shows us what we think causes people to have particular symptoms. So when you ask me about anxiety and I'm talking about sort of the how the body's responding to the thoughts, that's a method of understanding what's going on with anxiety. There are probably multiple ways of explaining that. That happens to be the one that I was trained in. And so by kind of educating my client into that mode of understanding, that organizational principle, that way we then work together to figure out how to remediate symptoms within that kind of understanding. So the advice comes in sort of saying, hey, here's a way of looking at your circumstance. Let's work within that understanding. And so I think of it sometimes as philosophy more than advice.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating. Um, what is the best way for people to find Parathera and connect with you?
Yeah, so our website is the best way. We are a virtual service, so anybody literally in the world, but certainly in the United States can find us. And we are at www.para-thera, thera.com. And I'll just let you know that we have different kinds of sessions. So you can come in and you can vent. Or you can do a problem solving session, or you can do a confidence building session where our whole point is to help you reframe and feel better coming out of that session. And then celebrate. And the reason that we have a celebrate session is that I really feel like people don't feel like they can connect and engage with their wins. Um, and when I was opening my business account for Parathera, I was chatting with the bank teller and telling her about the business. And she was like, "Oh, I just got promoted, but I don't have anybody to celebrate with because I'm not near my family and I just moved here." And I was like,
Yeah.
that's a celebrate, right?
Awesome.
Come and like let's really feel that,
That's
what it
awesome.
means for you to have made this new accomplishment. I want to celebrate you. The
Yeah.
other thing with celebration is that sometimes celebration can come with a feeling of loss. So what it took to get to that accomplishment means that you had to make some trade-offs. And sometimes you had to make some sacrifices. And so sometimes people avoid celebrating because they don't want to also feel the sense of sadness or intensity that came with what it took. So, you've got a family and you're still trying to graduate from college, and the energy that you had to put into that, like you were so proud of yourself. But there's a tinge of like, God, that was hard. Like that I
Yeah.
think being able to have a space where you can say, I'm really proud of myself and I'm sad about how hard this was,
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
really, really healing.
I agree with you. Yes, that is very healthy. Dr. Greco, thank you so much for sharing your insights about managing anxiety. And for our listeners who are struggling with anxiety, you are not alone, and there are tools and people who can help. Check out Parathera for more support options. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. Just search for Saginaw Spotlight. Until next time, Saginaw, keep smiling.